everybody, Hamer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time we've got Season 6, Episode 10, which is called Blues. So this one starts out with a girl named Judy Saunders rehearsing her singing in her apartment with a tape recorder. Her manager, Stu Gorman, arrives and she turns the recorder off to talk about her contract release, which he rips up in front of her and laughs. She threatens to call the police if he doesn't leave, and after he takes out the cord of her main phone, she goes out to her balcony for her second phone. Gorman picks her up and tosses her over the balcony to her death. Jim pulls up to a carnival slide ride in a brown convertible this time, getting instructions from the booth after some spy speak. The mission: Gorman, with the help of his financial assistant Belker, is horning in on the music industry to funnel money to the syndicate. And surprise, surprise, the IMF must put Gorman out of business. We have an apartment scene where the IMF listens to Judy's last recording, and we see some gadgetry before we cut to Gorman's office, where Sergeant Jim joins a Lieutenant Eckert to question Gorman about what happened that night, and the story he maintains is that Judy jumped to her death. Gorman and Belker then go to his studio to scope out some new talent. And the first auditioner is jive turkey Barney Collier, who calls himself Johnny Crane, and starts into a slow groove with a song called Judy's Gone Now, which is about, what you would expect it to be. It's heavy on some innuendo, which turns into direct implication that there was foul play involved in Judy's death. And that, of course, gets Gorman's attention. He has some flashbacks to the night it happened. Casey and Willie get some audio and video from Judy's apartment and take it to a lab to make a doctored recording, with Jim's recording of Gorman's voice mixed in with it so that a voice actor can impersonate him. And this voice actor and Casey record what seems to be a logical argument Judy and Gorman would have had that night, plus the accusations and scuffle and the scream that would have ensued. Barney is brought to Gorman's office by his muscle man Tanner, saying he knows that Gorman killed her and says he wants a music contract in exchange for his silence. Belker says, yeah, no problem, we agree, and tells Barney to come back later so that they have some time to look into what Barney is really all about. Belker follows Barney. He sees him walk into a probation office, which means he's a convict, then to a fairly seedy part of town where they see him get some drugs from a dealer. Gorman and the two sidekicks come to Barney's place, telling him at gunpoint to start talking. Barney says that Judy's tape recorder was on that night and captured the whole thing, and he's got the recording. Barney says he'll come to Gorman's office tomorrow with the proof, and the three no-good-nicks retreat for now. Gorman checks out Judy's apartment, where he sees that the tape recorder light is actually still on, so he wonders whether the story might be true. He then remembers that the police took lots of pictures that night, so Belker heads to the police station, where he tells police clerk Casey that he's a president of Judy's fan club and would like to see pictures of her apartment from the fateful night, offering her some cash to let him have a look. She accepts after some hesitation and gives him a picture indicating the light was indeed on, agitating Gorman, who is forced to listen to Barney's next audition session where he sings Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, while Willie messes with Belker's car, which explodes when he tries to start it. Belker is unhurt. He and Gorman come to the police station where Willie is being booked for the crime, and they don't recognize him, of course, and they can't figure out who put the hit out on Belker. Gorman tells Tanner to lean on Barney to try and find out what might be going on, but not too hard, as he can't afford to scare Barney off. Belker comes back to see Casey at the police station to find out who bailed Willie out. And he's given an address where he finds a returning Willie getting hit by a drive-by shooter. Willie confesses that Gorman put the hit out on him as he dies. Tanner comes to Barney's place and hides in his closet after snooping around a little bit, as Barney prepares a drug fix as part of the act. Belker arrives, as predicted, taking Barney's dope and demanding the tape, as Barney does a great job of showing signs of withdrawal. Barney says his partner Sergeant Jim has the tape, And as Belker leaves, Tanner comes out from his hiding place, grabbing the dope and informing Gorman of what he discovered, including Belker's visit, while Barney continues to writhe in pain. Gorman tells Tanner to dispose of Barney and calls Jim to say he'll double whatever Belker will come over to offer, indicating to Jim that something didn't go quite to plan. Barney doesn't answer the phone, so Jim gets Willie to try and go find him. Willie doesn't, and Tanner takes Barney to a secluded warehouse to shoot him, but fortunately Barney is able to overpower him and escape. Belker does arrive to see Jim, saying he knows he's got the tape and says that he can help get a lot more money out of Gorman than Jim could do on his own. Jim accepts, and Belker returns to the office, asking Gorman to meet him in the studio, where he lays out his accusation of using Willie to kill him, to Gorman's confusion. Belker plays the tape, and Gorman is amused as he knows it's a fake. Gorman pulls out a gun, and Belker warns him, saying that there's copies of the tape, and people will believe it. Gorman says that Belker's the only one who knows he killed Judy, and without him, there's no case. He prepares to shoot. At that point, the cops arrive, and Jim reveals that there was another tape recorder in the room, capturing the whole confession. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this one a grade of a C-. That's actually higher than I thought I was going to give it. I thought it was going to be down in the D range or even maybe a D-. Let's start with the good, as we normally do. This is a separate and mislead plot, and I have commented about that many, many times in the past. There's a lot of those. There's going to continue to be more of them. And my biggest problem with those kinds of plots, as I've mentioned before, is that typically what the IMF does is it takes two guys who are thick as thieves. I think I've used these exact words before, actually. Two guys who are thick as thieves, and then turn them against each other in what seems like way too little time or over something way too trivial. Here, I would actually say that to some extent, that is avoided, which is actually kind of refreshing. In this case, it does happen a bit quickly, over the course of maybe a day or two. However, I find it to be really, really logical, the way that the IMF has it laid out. They figure, they can't know this for absolutely certain, of course, but they figure that Belker is the only guy who would be a witness, maybe Tanner, but more likely Belker. Belker would be the one guy that could confirm that Gorman killed Judy. So he'd be the only witness, Gorman says it himself. That, without Belker, there's no corroborating witness, there's no case. And so for the IMF to stage things the way that they did, making it look like Belker has had a hit put out on him by Gorman, it actually does make some sense. It's a little bit contrived, but there's more effort put into that than is usual in these kinds of plots, which is actually kind of refreshing. And I actually didn't catch that the other times previously when I'd watched this episode. So it is really refreshing here. And I want to try and be objective. This isn't a great episode overall. I mean, C- isn't a great grade. But I will point out the good where and when I see it. Interestingly, William Wyndham, who is a veteran of this show. I think he's been in just about every episode. I don't recall whether we saw him in season 5. I have a feeling we didn't. But he's certainly in all of the other seasons. And interestingly, he is in a lot of these plots. The first one he was in, which was back in season 2, the first episode, which was called The Widow. Now I remember. Yes. And he was in exactly this kind of plot, and he'll be in another one in season 7. I should also point out that also I would say in the good category, good performances as always by William Wyndham as Stu Gorman, and also Ed Flanders, a pre-Saint Elsewhere Ed Flanders You might recognize him from that show as Belker. And also even I'll give some props to Alex Rocco as Tanner. He's adequately menacing in this one. So we got a pretty decent array of guest stars as well. Also good. At first glance, it seems like these guys are not really quality antagonists. I'm not saying that they're super duper antagonists, but they are competent. They're not pushovers. I looked for lameness and schmuckery, and frankly, I didn't see it. They did get played pretty well by the IMF, and I'm going to call this an earned win. Again, it's the sort of thing where the IMF seems to be using, a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of effort to put into this, to gaslight these guys, and going to the point where they're basically, doctoring a tape in an effort to trap these guys is, like I said, that's a lot of effort. Yeah, I'm definitely going to say that this is an earned win. It's got good teamwork, even if, Barney maybe does more than the other three. He's more in the limelight. But, in terms of execution, this one is actually a deceptively good plot. Moving on to some other things, one that's more of a point-counterpoint. There's some really great acting by Greg Morris as a junkie in this one. Like, wow, that's pretty good. It reminds me of back in season 4, Orpheus, where Peter Graves basically had to do the same kind of thing, where he was going through withdrawal. Not to mention, earlier this season, I almost forgot, but in the opening of this season in Blind, Peter Graves had to do basically a similar kind of thing as, having DT after, alcohol withdrawal. The counterpoint to that is, man, those music scenes, boy, there's something. I mean, I don't really know what adjective to use. A little bit painful. The whole singing thing with Greg Morris is, far out, man. I gotta tell you. If you care to go look for it, you can find it. I took a quick look. I have to dig a little bit deeper, but Greg Morris actually did put out an album, and I gotta tell you, I've only heard little bits and snippets of it, but if you watch this episode, you get a pretty good taste of what's on that album. Let me just put it that way. I don't know what to say. And again, that band. It's like, wow, there's something like, these guys are like straight out of the 60s. I don't even know what else to say. Moving on to stuff that's not so great. There's a lot of padding in this episode, including the singing. Maybe it was just something that Greg Morris wanted to do, and that's fine, I guess, but it still is quite a bit of padding. And all that time that the IMF spent making this doctored tape, it really does show that in terms of the action, the plot is kind of thin, and it seemed there really wasn't a lot that could really fill the hour. I'd also say there's probably not a lot of rewatch value here, unless you just want to kind of go back and watch the music sessions with Greg Morris. There's not a whole heck of a lot else here. I also think that the biggest problems with this episode are with the plot holes. The fundamental mission, as I mentioned, is well thought out, and it's above average in terms of your separate mislead plot, as I've already said. However, I thought about this idea that the IMF would not predict that Gorman would try and make some kind of move and send his guy Tanner over to Barney's place or trail him or something like that. The IMF plan obviously involved Belker, being told by Willie that Gorman is the guy who put the hit out on him, would go and try and get the tape from Barney. That makes sense, and that's exactly what the IMF had, and then they would just proceed with the rest of the plot. But, for Gorman to just kind of sit there and not make a move either, I don't know. Something really bothers me about that they couldn't predict that something like that might happen. And I can't quite put my finger on it, that the IMF was kind of caught flat-footed. It also bothered me a little bit about, the resolution of that plot. It certainly seems that not a lot of thought was put into this, and it's just a contrived wild card for the sake of something kind of going wrong. Again, maybe just to fill some extra time. For example, I read in another review saying, if Barney was able to overpower Tanner once they got to the warehouse, why wasn't he able to do it sooner? And I thought about that, and I said, that's actually a really, really valid criticism. However, in looking back at it, I rewatched that scene. I think that I think it actually seems pretty clear that Barney was genuinely surprised by Tanner's presence. He didn't notice him in his closet, and was totally not expecting that at all. Barney then sort of makes a move at one point, where he tries to make a move and say, "Hey man, give me my stuff," and he kind of reaches for Tanner, but he realized that Tanner's got a gun pointed right at him. So, making more of a move might have seemed too risky at the time. Then, I guess there wasn't really much of an opportunity as they drive to the warehouse for Barney to do much of anything. And even in the warehouse, Tanner kind of pushes him around until, Barney actually gets a little bit of space between them, and then he's able to kind of grab a chair and, break it over Tanner's back. It's not terrible, but because, I guess Barney took advantage of the first opportunity that he had. But again, there's just something a little bit off about that wrinkle in the episode. It's a little bit weird, to say the least. And, something's not quite completely thought out there. That's how I read it. Another plot hole that really kind of bothered me was, in the end, obviously they get Gorman, they engineer a public confession from Gorman. I just don't understand, Belker could have gone to a whole lot of places. He could have gone to Gorman's office. He could have asked Gorman to meet him somewhere. I don't know. Maybe it's not the most unusual thing in the world that he would ask Gorman, "Hey, come down to the studio, I want to talk to you." Okay. But the actual real plot hole is, how did the IMF know where Belker was going to go? And more importantly, even if they followed him, how would they make it so that they had a tape recorder ready to record the confession? That's where they kind of lost me. Had they bugged the most obvious places somehow, that might have made a little bit more sense. But again, there's a little bit of, more than a little bit, there's quite a bit of contrivance there that the IMF just kind of knew that's where they were going. It might have made a little bit of sense if Belker had said something to Jim at the police station about, I'm going to take this to Gorman. I'm going to play this for him in the studio. And if he doesn't pay up or whatever, we're going to nail that guy. And then maybe the IMF could have gone through the motions. You might have had Casey. Willie's obviously chasing after Barney. But, somebody could have actually planted the tape recorder over there. And then it might have made a little bit more sense. Again, it's just another one of those things where, as has happened more than a few times this season, where, they just don't seem to land the ending quite right. That plot contrivance and the ending, there's something unsatisfying because there's just a weird vibe surrounding. I think that's enough for this episode. Thank you as always for watching. Please like this episode review video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this episode, even if it's just about Greg Morris's singing. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.